Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special update episode. Not episodes. Welcome to the video. We're talking about the Zabu and Silver Surfer changes. So, actually, these changes have been leaked for a while, but I didn't want to make a video about it until it was official. You never know if there's going to be issues. But today, they have posted it. They've also updated it already, so it should be live by the time you watch this. But we're going to be talking about the Silver Surfer chains, Zabu changes. Were they necessary? Do I like that they're doing this? And do I still think they're going to be good, playable, blah, blah, blah. But they do have a post. I'm not going to read it verbatim. That'll take too long. But we're going to try to hit the important points. So Marvel Snap is making balance changes to 2 cards. And they have the game designer, Glenn Jones, just sharing some of the thoughts behind the changes. So this is their first non-patch change. So this is gonna be something they can now do in the future, make changes without having to release an official patch, which is really good. And they just want to explain why they're making these adjustments. So the content model gives the metagame a unique texture, right? Because they're getting new cards each week. So that might change the metagame. That's kind of a lie right now because so few people can get the new cards released each week that it's practically irrelevant to the metagame. So that's something they, theoretically it should happen. And as more people do complete Series 3, that might become more of a reality. But currently, that's not really the case. But it is an interesting way that the game is currently designed. The game is as most fun with a large variety of viable decks. Definitely true. Um, right now, that's not true. It's awesome to see individual cards succeed, but we need the success to exist within a spectrum. Yeah, so you don't want crazy broken decks, basically. So they're going to talk about the general process for balancing Snap. So their design team looks at individual cards and clusters and focusing on win percentage drawn and win percentage against the field, average Qs, all those juicy stats that they don't give us, unfortunately. And then they have a tolerance for those stats, and if they cross those stats, that's when balance changes happen. So they have like, oh, this is acceptable level of variance, and then they have an unacceptable level of variance. If it passes that unacceptable level, then they focus on balancing the card, trying to make it uh, fluctuate back into the acceptable level, basically. Um, so which changes to make? They want to find a version of each card that makes the game more fun, and not just leader them. Basically, I think leader is like a special case because it was too strong. And I don't think leader's unplayable. It's just not playable in the same way it used to be played, where it was I could play this in every deck kind of card. Now it's like you have to build your deck around this card, which is a lot harder. So definitely interesting. But fortunately, I don't think that's gonna happen to a lot more cards, and they might go revisit leader in the future. So now they talk about card changes. Weakening the season pass was not a like decision. And that's because you paid for the card, right? So nerfing cards that are in the season pass is gonna spark some outrage, but I think they messed up like with how strong the card was. I was so shocked it was released in that um with those abilities, right? The Silver Surfer one was maybe not as surprising, but especially the Zabu one, day one you could just tell this was not going to be balanced. So just kind of crazy that this got through, and it kind of it makes you wonder whether they were focusing on healthy gameplay or they were focusing on having people buy the pass. But we'll have to see in the future, right? Like you can maybe give them the benefit of the doubt for this first one, but if more situations like this arise, then you can't really you can't continue giving them that benefit. Zabu's individual card performance was strong but not amazing, but didn't crack your data. However, eventually 3 distinct Zabu decks started gaining steam, which was probably my Darkhawk deck, probably Dino and probably Drac Zabula, Drac Ghost Rider variant. The Dino one, I'm not 100% sure of. You could do a ton of Zabu decks, anyways. But that was when we knew a change was necessary. But since they had the patches already locked, they had to find an alternative way to do the patches. Is how they do it over the air. So let's talk about the actual change for Zabu. Zabu is becoming going from a 3-2 into a 2-2. So it's actually becoming cheaper, but the ability is changing from your 4 cost 2 less to your 4 cost 1 less. So it's kind of Sarah-esque. So they're doing this to reduce the potential energy reduction of the cats, making it harder for to hide game-winning amounts of power until turn 6 or emptying your hand for Dracula. So I think that kind of tells you what types of decks were problematic. Almost definitely the Dracula deck, the Spider-Man absorbing deck, and the Dark Hawk deck, right? Because the Dark Hawk hides game-winning amounts of power, and then Dracula lets you empty your hand. Signing it down to 2 costs hopefully refunds enough tempo to retain the fun of building around 4 cost cards. We expect Zabu decks to look a bit different. But self-competitive builds, essentially, I do agree with what they're saying. I think that was a big problem. The how much you could do in the after you play Zabu, you could do so much. You could just vomit out your hands, and you could lock people down. You could play tons of power. You can synergize, make combo decks. You know, react to opponent's board states. It was just like so free how much control you had in that flow of the game after you play a Zabu. So definitely think this needs to be changed. It going down to 2 might buff Mr. Negative decks. That's the big benefit of this change. But other than that, most Zabu decks are going to be weaker. So I think this is good news. I think this is healthy. So definitely happy for this change. But let's keep going. Silver Surfer's change is linked to Zabu. It's been a top 5 card, but was starting to get weaker until Zabu was released. But then during Zabu's dominance, Silver Surfer was overall the best deck and also had very good matchups. So it was very obvious that if you only nerf Zabu, then Silver Surfer would just become the dominant new tech. So they had to also touch Silver Surfer as well. It's going from a 3-0 on reveal, give your others 3 cost cards plus 2 power, to be a 3-2 on reveal, give your other 3 cost cards 2 power. So you are losing if you're playing more than 3 units, you're losing 1 extra power per unit, which I also think is fine. Definitely the playstyle was a very oppressive if you could hit especially Brood and its synergy. So kind of okay with this change as well. And also makes negative Surfer decks a little bit worse because you're not going to get the 0 cost Surfer anymore. So I'm kind of okay with that as well. For now, still expect patches to be the primary way to deliver balance changes, but they now have more tools to make emergency changes. So I think this is okay. We may experiment with slightly more frequent balance on a small scale. It's kind of interesting because these changes are already a small scale, but they're like, we might make them smaller. It's 1 change or something, but you know, you got to start somewhere, I guess. See if there's even better experience for players at our fingertips. Thanks for reading. Good luck on your next snap. So overall, I'm happy with these changes. I definitely think Zabu was very broken, very toxic, and very oppressive, and limited design decisions for every single other deck. You basically was like, is this deck good enough to deal with Zabu decks? No, I can't play it, right? So that was pretty disappointing. And then Surfer decks were also like kind of annoying, especially when you had Brood and a lot of other synergies. It was just like too good. So think both of these changes were warranted. Do I think they're too big of a nerfs? Not really. I think these are fair nerfs. I'd also still keep my eye on both of these cards. I'm not ready to say like these cards are now balanced. I could definitely see other archetypes propping up that still use this card. So I think this card is still going to be playable. I think their cards are still useful. It's just not going to be as like, are you playing Zabu or Surfer? No, well, get out of here. I think you can now open up more deck design options. So I just overall think this is great. I think this is a good move. Hopefully, this is a good sign for the future in terms of balance. It is problematic that the cards they're balancing happen to be season pass cards, because that's in poor taste, right? You shouldn't be adding cards to behind a paywall that have to eventually be nerfed. Like that in itself is a huge failure. So I'm definitely going to mentally like dock points for even being in this situation. I think this situation should not happen where the season pass cards should be in any level comparable where you have to even consider making changes like this. But overall, it's still good that they did nerf them. So we're just gonna have to see in the future if more similar situations arise, and you really have to question Second Dinner and their balancing team and their design and financial strategies. But overall, this is good news. You can now do other things besides Zabu Surfer. So hopefully it should be fun. Take care of yourselves and have a nice, wonderful day.